All right, well, hello everybody. Welcome to the fourth video in our series. This is all about loops today. I was going to edit this into two videos, but I've decided I'm going to go with three. So the first video in the series for A is really about the concepts that we need when we talk about loops. There's going to be three of those concepts. For B, we'll go through the explicit creation of a while loop. And then for C, we'll be talking about for loops, which are slightly different. All right, thanks. Let's get started. All right, well, let's start by looking at the basic three characteristics or properties or qualities that all loops have. And then we'll write in Python a while loop, because in Python, the while loop is the most explicitly obvious. It most explicitly embodies those three characteristics. Then in the second video, we'll move on to the for loop, where all of those three properties also exist, but they're a little more implicit, a little more difficult to see. So let's start with this overly simple version, counting to three. What I'm interested in here is not the process of getting to three, but it's I would like to extrapolate out of this example these three basic principles that all loops have. So if we think about how we'd like to count to three in English, we could go through the following steps, right? To begin with, we just haven't counted anything, and so implicitly our count is at 0 because we haven't started yet. Now, that's fundamentally taken to be true. It's so implicitly obvious, it's so commonsensical that we never really explicitly say, okay, look everybody, I'm going to count to 3 and right now I'm at 0. However, we already know in a computer program, we have to be as explicit as possible. So even though we rarely state that we're counting starting from 0 in the computer program, we will have to make that explicit. All right, so we're at 0. We add 1 to our count. We say that out loud. In Python, we'll probably just print that to the screen or something like that and say 1. And then we have a test in our head. Have we gotten to 3 yet? Well, we're only at 1, so the answer is no. The answer is false. So we go back to step 2. We add 1 to our count. We go from 1 to 2. We say 2. Is 2 the same as 3? No. So we go back. We add 1 to 2. Now we're at 3. So we say 3 out loud. Are we at 3? 3 equals 3. Yes, true. So now we stop and we're finished. Now, I know that's really obvious and I know that's really elementary, but I want to extract these three basic ideas that are implicit here in that model. Number one is that there is an initial status or an initial situation. It's the conditions of the universe, the conditions of the world before we begin this process. And so in this case, we're at 0. That's the initial status that we have to worry about or that we're trying to change. There is a boolean test of some kind. Remember George Boole, there's no maybes, there's no probablys, there's no kind ofs. Everything is either totally true or totally false. In this case, our boolean test is, have we got to 3 yet? That's an easy decision for us to make, and it's not partly, it's yeah, we're there, or no, we're not there yet. And the third condition is that there is a degree of change, or the third principle, I should say, is that there's a degree of change. So every time we perform this action, we are changing to some degree the status of the universe, right? That the idea of our count, the number that we're reciting, is different every time we repeat this process. And you can kind of see that there's some relationship between all of these parts, but it's these three parts that are the crucial component. This is the backbone of every loop that you will write. So number one, again, is that there is some sort of initial status. There is a preliminary situation. There is something about the environment. There's a circumstance in the environment that sets the stage for what is to follow. That might be, right, a simulation, or we might be counting something. We might be processing a million tweets or working through the complete works of Shakespeare. And the initial status is going to be, well, maybe we haven't looked at any Shakespeare plays yet. Maybe of a million tweets, we haven't looked at any. Maybe we're still sitting at 0, right? Maybe there's all of the ice cream yet in the cooler and we have not finished eating it. So the status is freezer is full, right? There's going to be some sort of an initial status at the beginning, and that initial status will change by the time that the loop is finished. There will always be some sort of a boolean test. So have we finished counting? Have we gone through a million tweets? Is there any ice cream left? Yes or no? And that's always going to be a true false test. It's going to be boolean in that sense. And then the third part is this degree of change. We will look at the Shakespeare plays one at a time. We will analyze the tweets one at a time. We will eat that ice cream one spoonful at a time, and we will get to the end, come hell or high water, no matter what it takes to eat through all of that ice cream. So all of these sorts of things have this degree of change. It's a measurable amount of change that we keep applying. Right? So all of these three parts work together. The degree of change is usually measured, right? Not always, but sometimes in that Boolean test. The Boolean test usually measures something about the status of the universe or the situation in which we find ourselves. But these three parts exist in every loop. And if you can start to identify these three parts, that's going to help you a lot as you start to write other loops. So let's just move this a little bit slowly, but let's just move this into Python so that we can see how we would actually write this in Python. You can probably guess some of these already. So to begin, we haven't counted anything and we're at 0. That means we'll need a variable as a way to keep track of what we've counted. So I just created a little bucket here. I'm going to call it count. And because we haven't started yet, I'm just going to put 0 into that bucket. That's the initial status or the initial environmental condition in which we find ourselves to start. Then we'll add 1. We already know how this works, right? Equals is a transitive verb. So I'm going to take the value of count, which is 0. I will add 1 to it, and I'm going to put that into the bucket on the left-hand side, which actually is still count. So I'm going to overwrite the old value. So now count is 1. We'll say that out loud, or in Python we'll print it. Here I've written down a print command. We'll just echo that out to the screen so that our viewers or the users can see that. And we'll do a Boolean test. Remember, in Boolean terms, the test for is the thing on the left the same as the thing on the right is the double equal sign. So we'll ask somehow, is count equal to 3? Well, right now it's only 1, so that's false. So therefore we repeat the process, right? We're going to go back up and we'll go back to 2. We add 1. 1 is in the count bucket. We add 1, now it's 2. We overwrite the old value. We're going to say that out loud or print it. And now we get back to our Boolean test. Does 2 equal 3? No, it does not. And so we repeat the process one more time. We add 1 to the count. 2 plus 1 is 3. We say it out loud. We echo or print 3 to the screen. And now we do our Boolean test. Does 3 equal 3? True, right? In this case, yes, it does. So therefore, we have achieved our final status, and therefore the loop is finished. Right. Here's what that really looks like in Python. So the same thing, these three parts are really, really explicit in a while loop. So my initial status, or the conditions of the universe at the beginning, is that we haven't counted anything, so count therefore equals 0. The second line is my Boolean test. So as long as the value in count is less than the number 3, as long as that Boolean test, count is less than 3, as long as that evaluates to true, I will continue to repeat the block that follows. Now that block has a degree of change, and here's where I add 1 to the bucket count. So these are the three parts of the loop that are really crucial, right? That initial status, the Boolean test, and the degree of change. They're all three here. Now, the syntax of the loop is really similar to what we saw when we were working with conditionals. This is one of the great things about Python. Once you get a kind of hang of that syntax, it gets repeated everywhere. So the Boolean test that count number 3, or count is less than 3, sorry, is followed by a colon and followed by a block or a suite. That indented part is exactly what gets repeated as long as that Boolean test is true, right? So everything that's indented, it could be here 2 lines, it could be 20 lines, it could be 200 lines. It doesn't really matter. As long as all of those lines, all of those statements are indented, Python knows that they're a part of the block or the suite of that loop, and it is those indented commands that will get performed all the time. And again, just like in the conditional, the colon is the clue to Python that signals that a block or a suite is following. Here, the key word for our loop is while. So as long as that Boolean test evaluates to true, as long as count is less than 3, true, we will continue to execute that block. Now, one of the things that's really crucial here, I want to be really, really explicit and point this out, is that even though we use the term while, Python only does that Boolean test when Python is executing while count is less than 3. So at some point, count is going to go equal to 3, maybe even greater than 3, but Python only checks when it executes the statement while count is less than 3. In other words, that Boolean test is executed only at the top of the loop. And so if it goes false somewhere in the block or the suite, Python won't know that until we return to the top. And when we return to the top, that is when Python will notice whether it's true or false. And if it's false, we'll skip the rest of it. This is a really crucial idea, and I wanted to spend some time on it because this is one of the places where beginners to Python get a little bit confused. They implicitly believe somehow that Python does that Boolean test at every line within the block, but that is not true. The only time Python does the test is when execution flips back up to the top. And you'll notice there isn't any explicit please go back to the top. Python knows already when it gets to the end of the block that it should flip back up to the top and start over. So we don't ever explicitly have to tell Python, please return to the top and please do that Boolean test again. It already knows how to do that. This is built in to the concept of a loop in Python. Well, in the next video, we're going to look at how to build a while loop, and explicitly a while loop that goes through a list.